Well, back in February of this year, we did a story about a nonprofit organization and a man named John Mills. He happens to be a software architect, researcher, and founder of a nonprofit organization. John became very interested in the history of slavery in the state of Waterbury, Connecticut. And he discovered, that is, some very important historical information about a formerly enslaved man by the name of Fortune. Now, Mr. Fortune died in 1798, and in an act that it was not that unusual. His bones were used by his enslaver to open a school for teaching anatomy. Now, his enslaver happened to have been a doctor himself. His name was Dr. Preserved Porter. And Dr. Porter had many family members who also became doctors. And Dr. Porter used the bones from Mr. Fortune to teach his family members how to practice medicine. They became doctors experimenting on these bones from Mr. Fortune. Well, fast forward to today, Mr. Fortune's bones were donated to a museum where they were on display for 4 decades. Ultimately, his bones were laid to rest at a cemetery in Waterbury, Connecticut in 2013. And now, on November 2nd, there will be a piece of public art in the city of Waterbury, Connecticut, paying respect and honor to Mr. Fortune, his wife, and his 4 children. In this hour, John Mills returns to the show, the researcher that discovered this important piece of Connecticut's history. Also joining us is Katiana Jarboth Smith. She is a visual artist, and she has been commissioned to create the tribute to Mr. Fortune, and also a nonprofit leader, Matt Conway, a founder of RiseUP Group, who's been heavily involved in this project, is joining me. I'm going to talk to John and Katiana and Matt about the importance of this project for Connecticut, but what this project also means on the national level, particularly as we think about, talk about, and see states like California do something around the issue of reparative justice and reparations. So welcome back to the show, John. Really a pleasure to have you back. I remember when you were on several months ago, the story had gotten a lot of national media attention because we've been talking all year about reparative justice and reparations, and talking about projects like yours where folks are digging up graves or trying to put markers on graves of enslaved people. So talk to us about what has happened with this story of Mr. Fortune since you were last here in February.
Yeah, so as you know, this is my nonprofit. That's what we do, right? We go and try to find either the formerly enslaved or those in history, African Americans, that may not have been the definition of what America tried to teach us as those that are exceptional. But to me, they're exceptional because these people endured and they survived and they persisted long enough for us to exist today, right? And so Mr. Fortune, as you know, was an enslaved man in Waterbury in the 18th century, died in 1798, supposedly by accident, but then his enslaver, being a doctor, then used his bones to then open a school of anatomy and teach a lot of people to become doctors, and that went on for a long while. And he actually wasn't even buried until 2013, 215 years after he died. Our idea was, he had a family. He had 4 kids and a wife when he died. He based on the studies that Howard University and Quinnipiac University and a bunch of universities did on his bones, he worked hard in life. You could tell by where the ligaments had been torn from his bones, and where he was working with a broken back that had healed before he died, and a broken arm. So he worked hard in life trying to, support his family and deal with this enslaver. So we wanted to honor that. Whereas generally, these are the type of people that aren't honored, and they're not represented anywhere. And so that's.
Let me stop you for a second, John. Of all the research that you did, what stuck out to you about Mr. Fortune? I mean, because like you said, your organization, your nonprofit does this research on historical figures, people who have been enslaved, not necessarily the Harriet Tubmans of the world, the people that, are well known to history. But what stuck out to you about Mr. Fortune's story?
Well, what stuck out the most is this was an international story when he was buried in 2013. Many people had researched the story. And I'm not the first one to go digging through these documents about who he was and where he lived and how he lived. But what stuck out to me most was he was absent from that community. And then there were members of the community today, this isn't more than 11 years since his burial, that still don't even know the story. It's like it didn't get any press and he's not represented anywhere in the community. That's what stuck out. For me, I wanted him to be injected into that community so that people would continue to know and learn from who he was. And it's a common thing in the northern states, this idea that slavery was a southern thing. And this is a reminder that no, it was broader than that. And so that stuck out the most, that he was just absent from any memory in the community visually, and that there were people in the community that didn't even know who he was. So we wanted to change that.
No, that's great. And I want to bring you into the conversation, Matt. So you're the founder of RiseUP Group. What role has your organization played in this whole remembrance project?
Yeah. RiseUP, John reached out to us, it's probably going on 1.5 years at this point. And so it's a long process to make public art happen. And I think one of the things that, we bring to the table is understanding that community inclusive process. So the first thing that we brought to the table when John reached out was, all right, who are the organizations locally in Waterbury that need to be at the table to help tell the story, help it reach a broader, audience, inject it into the community. And over the, past 18 months, we've been chipping away at that community outreach and that community engagement. And, we found a home for Fortune's story because of that in the north end of Waterbury, which at a community center, nonetheless, where hundreds of kids are going to be able to see Mr. Fortune every day. So it's that community inclusive process through the hundreds of pieces of public art and murals that we've done across the state that I think, have helped bring this to life. But it's been an incredible community and team process. And John and Katiana from our team, more than just an artist, Katiana is also someone who's leading the charge organizationally, project management as well. So it's an incredible effort to try and make murals happen. It's not just, call someone, paint on a wall. It's a real labor of love and dedication. And that's how you get that kind of 2 + 2 = 5 impact, is kind of taking it slower rather than just, getting out and painting the artwork.
So what kind of response, Matt, did you get? So your job was to go out and talk to community members, get buy-in from this community. Did you get any pushback?
Honestly, not much pushback. We've gotten a lot of people that have asked, how can we help? How can we be at the table? One of the biggest challenges with public art is just finding a wall or a space. So I would say, any of the pushback was just, is this the right wall? Will this, location have the impact we want it to have? So we had a couple roadblocks with that, with identifying a building, but the community brought us this wall, which I think makes it that much more special.
What do you think, John? Matt described this as a community center. Was it your hope that this would be housed in a community center, or were you thinking it would be on the side, say, of City Hall or courthouse or something? I mean, that's often a place of public art as well in some cities.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. My initial thought was, which was very ostentatious, right? I was like, I want to see this on the largest building in the middle of the city, right downtown, where no one can ever miss it, right? That was my original idea. But that's a tough thing to do. And we ended up getting buy-in from the mayor and the city to put it on this recreation center wall, which I'm drawn to love the idea of where it's at, because it's right in the center of where, around where Fortune would have lived and would have been around. And it's right in the middle of an African-American community, of which there will be other African-Americans that will be able to enjoy this in that specific community. And it's at a community center where there's hundreds of people that are coming through all the time. So lots of people are going to see this mural. So I've grown to kind of embrace kind of how we've resolved to.
And Katiana, let me get you in the conversation. You are the artist. I know Matt said you have other hats that you wear in terms of the organization that you're a part of. But when you approach a project like this, did you have a photograph of Mr. Fortune and his wife and 4 children? What is, and maybe it's not going to be a depiction like I'm thinking of a picture. So maybe I'll start by asking you to describe what the public art process is and what people can expect to see.
My approach to this, knowing that there were 2 former artists at the Mattatuck Museum where Fortune's remains were displayed for many years. There were 2 artists that were commissioned previously that actually used images of his remains to actually reconstruct what he would have looked like. Those reconstructions are actually copywritten and were only allowed to be used for the Mattatuck Museum's uses. So for me personally, I guess, knowing that I didn't have a full image of his skull, I would say that, I kind of reimagine what Fortune and his family would look like within this piece here.
And when you go through this process, and maybe I'll ask you, John, is there a vetting process? Is there an approval process? Like, John, you've been so close to this story. I would imagine you have a vision of what you would like this mural to look like. Are you going to be given the ability to, say yay or nay? I'd like to see things change, etc. Or is this totally up to the artist?
Well, we relied a lot heavily on Katiana. She's proficient and well-respected in the art community. So I was heavily reliant on how Katiana, heard what we thought and brought to the table. And it was more than just me, right? Like, we brought in, as Matt said, the Greater Waterbury NAACP was involved. We had the local church that Fortune attended involved in this. We had the mayor's office involved in this. The State Historic Preservation Office was involved in this. There were just a large number of entities that talked through, what we knew, what we thought, how we wanted this represented. And then, Katiana went and did her thing, which is an incredible depiction. She, as you know, those bones hung in a museum for some 4 decades. And so to kind of give the sense and the remembrance of the fact that Fortune was in a museum for a while, she's created some small tidbits within the mural that, if you know the story, you'll see that reference to the bones and to how his remains were kind of used, while still giving the great respect to him sitting in his esteem with his family. It's just amazing what she came up with. We're ecstatic about unveiling it for the public. We're really happy that we've got donations to support this from Kelly Clarkson and from Aisha Tyler from Criminal Minds. Other celebrities as well donated to this. So we're just really happy that.
And were those individuals, some of those celebrities, are they associated with this town or just got interested in this story?
I think they just got interested in the story because I'm doing this type of work across states. Like, I'm doing this in Connecticut, New Jersey, and Baltimore, different places. But as it relates to what we were doing here in Connecticut, it got that story. There was interest from the Washington Post, and then, of course, from the Kelly Clarkson show. And then and I think those 2 channels allowed some folks to help us, raise the funds to bring this to fruition. So we're ecstatic about being able to unveil this for the public.
And does your work end, Matt, after the unveiling takes place?
No, these murals are, in the community for the long run. And, John and I and Katiana are already talking about how else can we inject this mural into the community. So we do a lot of work in the Waterbury schools and in the broader community. So we're always thinking now, okay, how can we bring Fortune's story and John and his organization into the work we're doing as we continue to do the work in Waterbury?
Well, I know the unveiling is taking place on November 2nd. Congratulations to you, Matt, for your involvement, Katiana, as the artist of this very important project. Congratulations to you. And John, obviously you brought the story forward in some ways. I know you said other folks have done research on it even before you, but you got it over the finish line. So a lot of praise to you for that. But John, when you were here in February talking about your work, there were some other significant cases that you were working on, including a project involving your own relative, William Cooper. What is the status of that project now?
Yeah, that one, we're raising money. We're still trying to raise money on that one. But there are a couple things happening, my own efforts. And then there is the efforts of Dr. Kluge, who is a professor at a university in that area. He's trying to work to collect all the names of the individuals that were buried at this historically Black cemetery in Baltimore, Laurel Cemetery, so that they can kind of reconstruct who's there and find other ways to honor them. Ultimately, the story is my third great grandfather, William Cooper, fought in the Civil War in the Navy. And after he passed, after the Civil War, he was buried at Laurel Cemetery, again, a historically African-American cemetery that in late 1950s or early 1960s was paved over to build a parking lot. And years later, after doing some research and studies of that parking lot, it was discovered that there's some 30,000 bodies underneath that parking lot. They were supposed to kind of move the graves, but they actually never did. So there's 30,000 graves there, which is, I mean, that's where my third great grandfather is. And so we wanted to figure out a way to honor him specifically. One way was to get a cenotaph or a memorial stone placed at a military cemetery that's less than a mile and a half down the road. But in order to do that, the cemetery requires that you purchase a plot. And then after you purchase the plot, the VA will give you the stone. And then we could like build things around that plot, a celebration, a story that we can kind of tell about his life and what he did in the war and why he joined. Right now, we're still in the works of kind of raising the funds to purchase the plot in order to get that done.
So when you do this work, like I said, this has been an interesting year. We've seen cities around the country create reparations commissions. We've seen states like California study reparations and the influence of California on chattel slavery and the aftermath. We saw some bills get passed in the state legislature in California. I saw bills get vetoed around reparations by the governor of the state. How has that worked? This renewed, I'll call it, or almost energized interest in reparations, has that impacted your work at all? Meaning, has it helped you perhaps either raise more money or at least to raise more awareness about the importance of your work?
Well, I think the renewed interest in it, there are certain organizations that now aligned and help and agree to help more than they probably would have in the past. But it's a common challenge of, why are you trying to tell this sad story? Why are you trying to continue to talk about this history that was so long ago? And that bugs me. That bugs me because I these people I revere, and to me I don't see it that way. I don't see it as some trauma that I'm trying to resolve. I actually see it, if I'm being honest, I see white Americans who ask me that question as having some trauma, which is why they're trying to ask me to stop talking about it. Like, I see it as their trauma, right? And so that's a part of my work. Like, I'm trying to change the narrative with regards to the people that we're trying to remember and learn. I'm trying to, as I do my research and find this information, I'm trying to find the current day descendants so that they can get this history about their own families and they can see why they should remember them and revere who they were. I mean, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. Don't let anybody try to tell you to forget who they are. Like, so it's work in trying to change how people process learning about this history. And the outcome just happens to be ways I'm injecting these people into these communities. But it's all the legwork in between of trying to get minds to change, which to me is the actual real work.
It's interesting to me that you would say that people are, discourage you from researching this history when we know that, museums are full of statues and monuments and, historians. That's what they do. They dig up history because we know knowing our history gives us a lot of insights into our current situation and into the future. So I'm also disturbed by the fact that people don't want you to discover this history. And I was going to ask you, and you brought it up, the family members. So like Fortune, were you all able to find any of his descendants?
I wish I could do that. Look, I talked to some of the doctors who examined his bones. And I know that they have the means, the way I understand it, they have the means to determine genealogically or biologically whether or not they're currently descendants. But I think there's some legality around that. But me just trying to, by just standard means genealogically to try to find these people, no, I haven't been able to do that. Immediately after Fortune died, his kids were shortly thereafter sold off. And his wife as well was shortly thereafter sold off. And once they're sold in different directions, we kind of lose the trail.
But by talking about the story and getting the national and international attention that it's gotten, did anyone come forward to say, I heard that I was related to either Dr. Porter or to Fortune?
I haven't gotten that. I haven't, and it's easy kind of to track down Dr. Porter's relatives. Like the last person who held Fortune's bones was Dr. Sally McGlannon. She was one of the first women to graduate as a doctor from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And so like, I have all the pieces of her family. It'd be really easy to trace current day descendants.
But is she related to Dr. Porter?
Oh yeah. The bones passed down within Dr. Porter's family. And each generation used those bones. When Sally McGlannon gave those bones to the museum, she told the museum about her lineage and how she got them. And she talked about how her father taught her anatomy from these bones. She also talked about how she played with them when she was a little kid. This family literally, we're learning from these bones and becoming doctors all the way up to when Sally McGlannon graduated from Johns Hopkins in 1907 as one of the first women doctors to graduate from Johns Hopkins. It's a long history of doctors from 1798 all the way up to 1907. So it's easy to find them, but commonly with any African-American that there's dissension that goes into enslavement, you're gonna have some challenges, right? And Fortune's no different. His is actually a little more difficult than is common.
Well, yeah, I was just curious. I know that the Jesuits, in their slavery remembrance project, they literally were able to find the descendants of enslaved African-American men and women, or African men and women that were transported from Maryland to St. Louis to Kansas City to other places for the purposes of building these Jesuit universities. And they went through the whole process of identifying the descendants, and they have done a fairly effective job of finding all of the descendants of the enslaved people that were owned and enslaved by Jesuit priests in the 1800s as they were building these Jesuit universities. So to your point, it absolutely positively can be done. Mm-hmm. Obviously, resources play a big deal in that, having a lot of money, as the Jesuits do,
right,
is a factor. So, John, what is the impact you hope this work has?
Yeah, ultimately, I'm actually from the West Coast, right? I grew up in San Diego, I'm like a child of the 70s, and my father was really heavy into like what was going on at that time. He was real heavy into like the Panthers and the US organization and all that stuff that was happening. He was real hard and fast about being proud of your skin color and your features and your hair texture and all that stuff, right? And as I got older, I started to realize that there was a lot of outside influences that had gotten my mind to not see it that way. Like I saw white America as of greater value. And then I had to process it, like, how did that happen? And I didn't want my daughter to come to that place. So my work has constantly been about trying to find ways to get people to look in the mirror and self-interrogate to figure out if they have their own unconscious biases that could be impacting others outwardly, how they're presenting in the world. That's what this is all about. And so, and this is just one of those topics that, around history and the story of the African American in this country. That is one that I think has been purposely, the intent is to suppress us from talking about it, from learning about it, from hearing about it. Again, because I think that there's a trauma with regards to individuals that were either descendants of the enslaver or have come to a realization in current day that they've been in the center all this time. And so I think there's this push to kind of stop us from talking about this because that makes them feel bad. And I think if we buy into that, we're just kind of throwing away people that were, the million side of that 1 in a million equation, that were the people that were enduring and surviving so that we exist. And we should actually be revering them, and talking about them, not forgetting them. And we should actually be proud when we hear about them. We shouldn't be thinking from the mindset of it, oh, it's embarrassing or sad. That's a sad story, or they were enslaved. No, I feel like we should be thinking about it from a position of that they were powerful, they were God-fearing people, they were resilient, and that's why we are here today talking. And so that's the message I'm trying to send. I give a lot of lectures on this topic, and it seems to be garnering interest, and people are processing this different way of thinking about this type of history, but nevertheless, I still have constant challenges about telling the truth. And so, you keep forging.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You said you give a lot of lectures. Is it primary colleges or high school? And what is the university community? Because a lot of university historians do this work. Like I said, I know from the last couple of years with the work I've been involved in around reparations that there's a lot of interest in finding grave sites and doing markers. And, even in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the race massacre, not slavery, but that race massacre where there were hundreds and hundreds of African Americans who were buried, graves were, there was a denial on the part of the government that these people were even buried in this particular part of town. And there's been this project to dig up, to discover these graves so that they can put markers, so that they can learn about some of the people that were a part of that massacre. So are you being well received? Is it the college level? Is it the high school level? Where are you getting this more positive reception?
Both. My trade, I majored in software engineering, and my actual day job is as software architect, but I trained in genealogy at Boston University. And so the stuff that I do comes with that background of training in this field as well. And I've been welcome and given lectures at Yale University, at Wesleyan, at Central Connecticut State University, at a bunch of different university level places, but also at the high school level and at the grade school level, which has me adjusting, how and what I say. At the university level, it's commonly the African American Studies department. They're specifically looking to talk about that topic. So where they're talking about some of my research subjects. But yeah, it's been well received in those channels where they're already kind of talking about.
So I know Kelly Clarkson, you were on her show, so that doesn't seem like the likely place, for a conversation like this. But what was that like? And what was, what has Kelly been so interested in as it relates to your work?
I think that Kelly, it aligned really well, because when I was on the Kelly Clarkson show, it was during the month of June, and it was on Juneteenth, and it was my second great grandfather Ned Mills, was freed in Texas on Juneteenth. Like there were like these overlaps, and so it kind of made sense. And it was a community story. We were coming up on doing a community outreach thing at the North End Rec, where we were inviting in the community to actually help us paint the mural. So Kelly Clarkson kind of helped us get that word out about it. And then she also helped us with kind of getting my organization's name out there a little more, so that, which is helpful for me, because I'm really hopeful that I can help in helping African Americans kind of learn their personal genealogy, like not just these broad stories, but personally their personal stuff. So she can kind of help that get out there as well. And then of course it was helpful that on the day I was there, Aisha Tyler was there, and so she was able to learn more about it and contribute. And we talked after the show, and she's been incredibly helpful as well. So it was good.
It's great, and congratulations on that. When you say African Americans learning their own history, I mean, is that going to one of these ancestry.com type sites, or what advice would you give someone that wants to learn more about their history? Like, where do they start, particularly if they, maybe don't want to use one of those online ancestry sites, or maybe they don't have the money to invest in one of those, surveys?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that the first thing that they should likely do is in most states, probably every state, there's a state library. And at the state libraries, they have genealogists that are employed that will help you as you just walk in and ask the question. I think that's probably the first place. Like come up with a question that you're trying to figure out with regards to your family, like something very specific that will lead you down, more and more questions, but like a base question, right? Like, I don't really know who my great grandfather was, or I don't know where he came from, but here's what I know about him. Start with a base question and just go to the state library and use one of their employees, their resources there. That's what they do. They direct you on how to go figure out the answer to that question. I think that's the kind of probably the first path. But my nonprofit, it helps as many people as we possibly can, because when I started to realize, when I got older and started learning about my ancestors, as my sister was doing this research in the early and mid 90s, before there was an ancestry.com, like she was literally traveling to places and going to their town clerks. I learned that I didn't really have interest in any of this before that. And I think that's probably common, that our African-American community has little interest in a lot of this stuff. And I don't think that's by accident. I think we've been told not to have interest in this. And I think that our system of education kind of boxed it all into this small little container and didn't give us anything to feel an interest in. And I think, so for that reason, I'm also trying to affect that. I'm trying to change it. So it's like, no, we should be interested in this. And it's broader than this select few of individuals. And the story is broader. And your story is probably much more interesting than you think. And so,
it's interesting that you say that, John, because you're right. We've been inculcated with this message that, that happened a long time ago. Let's let the past be the past. Let bygones be bygones. None of us were there. And it's interesting how I'm thinking of African Americans that I know, particularly older ones, who don't want to talk about that family history, don't want to talk about slavery. And then even younger people, you often hear people say, oh, not another slave story, right? Don't want to watch another slave story. Don't want to learn about another slave. So it's kind of this a negative associated with, slavery is painful. Yes, watching certain movies with the brutality and the sexual assaults and the physical attacks is really, really difficult. But in the midst of all that pain is our history, and burying our heads in the sand or acting like it didn't happen, doesn't make it any better, doesn't make it go away. So I'm really grateful to you for having the courage to stand up to those folks that would rather not talk about unpleasant things in our history, to keep forging ahead and telling those stories. So good luck to you on this Waterbury, Connecticut unveiling that will be happening again on November 2nd. I'm sure there'll be lots of media and press around it, and just all the work that you're doing to tell these very, very important stories of our ancestors.